Welcome to another edition of Critical Issues, Alternative Views. I'm Ron Kramer, and I serve as the host of the program. I'm a professor of sociology at Western Michigan University. Joining me are two of our regular critical commentators and a very special guest. On my right is Denise Keele. Denise is a professor in the political science department at Western Michigan University. She also is affiliated with the Institute of the Environment and Sustainability. She's the chair of the WMU Working Group on Climate Change and sort of de facto of the Kalamazoo Climate Crisis Coalition. Right? So she has a lot of different hats that she wears. On my far left, and I won't make a comment about the far left part, Don Cooney. Don's professor in the School of Social Work at Western Michigan University, former Kalamazoo City Commissioner. And our special guest is Bill Farmer. Bill is an educator and an organizer. He has worked as an arbitration advocate. He is retired from a position with AFSCME. And in general, we just decided that he's a rabble-rouser. So, but he's been on the program before, so Bill, welcome back.
Thank you.
And Bill's special concern, you've been working with the Bernie Sanders campaign, and you've had a long-standing concern with the issue of universal health care, Medicare for all, so I know we'll get into those today. So, a funny thing happened on the way to the nomination.
Sure did. Yeah.
Super Tuesday. So. We go from a point where it looks like Bernie's in an outstanding position to gain ground and perhaps secure the front-runner status, and then it seems like a very concerted effort by the moderates in the party to stop Bernie. This was a stop Bernie move. So Buttigieg drops out, right? Throws his support to Biden. Amy Klobuchar drops out, throws her support to Biden. And then all of a sudden,
Beto O'Rourke.
Beto O'Rourke endorses him. All of a sudden, Joe Biden makes a roaring comeback, and the results on Super Tuesday gave Biden quite a few states and pushed him into the lead with regard to delegates. Bernie managed to hang on and have a couple of states, most importantly California.
Yes.
And a very delegate-rich state. So, and then of course Bloomberg drops out very shortly thereafter because his money didn't buy him any votes. Money can't buy you love, and it can't buy you votes, apparently, is what Bloomberg found out. But Bloomberg drops out, but also endorses Biden. And so now it came down, and then of course the final thing that happened just yesterday, Elizabeth Warren decided to drop out, and she still has not announced what she's going to do. Obviously, ideologically, she should be supporting Bernie and advocating for Bernie, but she has not indicated what she's going to do at this point. So we're down to a two-person race. Two old white guys, two guys that look like us three are left, right? I don't think that's necessarily a good thing.
I would agree with that. Yeah. And going against another old white guy.
We got three white guys, really old white guys that are contending for this. So it's down to Bernie versus Biden. So Bill, from as a Bernie supporter, somebody who's been working with the campaign, what's your kind of take on what just happened, the events from Super Tuesday that I just sort of recounted there?
Yeah. Well, there's so much that we can cover here. Personally, in many respects, I think Bernie has already won the campaign. Maybe not necessarily in delegates, but over the past 4 years, maybe 5 years, Bernie's campaign, his position papers, has changed the complexion of the entire Democratic Party. And actually, not only the party, but more importantly, of the consciousness and perspective and understanding of the general population of the United States. So he's already had a tremendous impact. His campaign is one of organizing, which I think is the very first attempt at grassroots organizing officially within a national campaign. I think that's going to have a life beyond the campaign, beyond the elections. Just like our revolution was formed after the 2016 campaign and did grassroots organizing, this is going to continue, and it's going to continue to grow, because personally I think Bernie's campaign and his specific policies represent a shift and a fundamental change of how we look at wealth and its distribution in this country. And I just think he's building on that, and we are building on that. For example, Michigan. There were hundreds of canvassing and phone banking events before the campaign got here. And that was all on a voluntary basis. So now they've opened up a campaign office officially at 121 West Kalamazoo Avenue. There were over 80 people at the opening, and everybody pledged to do canvassing and phone banking. Their goal is to make 100,000 visits, and it's very possible within the general area of southwestern Michigan. And that's happening throughout all the major cities and minor cities in Michigan. So it's a movement. It's exciting, and I'm glad to be a part of it, and I would encourage everybody to take advantage of this might be once in a lifetime opportunity to represent and act on behalf of fundamental change in this country. So, you know, that's my opinion, that's my experience. I see a lot of enthusiasm. Now, do you want to get into what changed for Biden and Bernie after the Super Tuesday?
Well, yeah, I mean, we've got
Sure.
a political scientist here. Let's get her take on it and see if you concur with what the political scientist
Sure.
said.
So yeah. Now we're at 2. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard is still technically staying in the race.
Right.
It's unclear why with two delegates. And it is interesting to see the early states. You know, my poor Iowa had quite the trouble with those counts, right? And one of the only 2 caucus states left, right? So when we look at Bernie 2016 and Bernie 2020, many of the states that he won in 2016 have moved to these primaries where it is a winner takes all. And that's where I do think you see the party leadership and endorsements start to matter more. That Clyburn came out in South Carolina and endorsed Biden, probably one of the most powerful endorsements we've ever seen in political history. The black vote is absolutely going for Biden in all those states. So I don't know that Bernie has won. I would agree with you on the issues, right? It's very, very close, right? We're at just over 1,300 delegates out of 1991 to win. And it's essentially a dead heat, and there's a long way to go in this race, right? I think that's the big headlines. Yes, we're down to 2. They're essentially equal if you look at some of the states that they are winning and those different population centers and what states are left to come. Like, of course, Michigan. Most of the West is probably looking very Bernie-ish, right? But most of the South, if that trend continues, is looking very Biden, right? Both Cook Report and 538 have either Bernie or Biden at 248 to 248 if we go to the presidential at a 270 at this point right now. So dead heat with a lot of states to go. Some very important states, right? Michigan is coming up March 10th. Wisconsin is still end of April. So there are some really, really important bellwether states yet to happen. Yeah.
So you were making a broader point about the way in which the Bernie campaign has moved us forward politically and ideologically.
Yeah.
And so even if Bernie is going to not gain the nomination, you're still going to see major gains that have been made for progressive politics out of this.
Absolutely.
So that point, I agree with that. Now, what's your take on the horse race now? Michigan is coming up next Tuesday, March 10th. Bernie won Michigan in 2016.
That's right.
Well, this is not 2016.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a battle. And I'm not going to predict anything. What I do is work.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the majority of the Bernie supporters understand, that this is a battle. I don't know how Michigan will go, but I do know my efforts are going to be in Michigan, and they're going to be in Indiana, and where else it needs to be done. But I try to put things in a context, in a social context, and what does the campaign, Bernie's campaign, really represent? And to me, it represents 80 years of propaganda, basically, against a Bernie-type campaign. We're coming out of the Cold War. The Cold War has morphed into national concern about terrorism and all the associated isms that implies, socialism, communism, all of which are being heaped on the back of Bernie Sanders. And it is specifically depicted in the popular press. I've been watching TV, and one example is that a commentator on CNN, there was probably a 10-minute segment that was a strictly advertisement on behalf of Biden and Bloomberg. And this was before Super Tuesday. And within the context of being an impartial newscast. Just the other day, and where I'm going with this is that people are scratching, the talking heads are scratching their heads on how did Biden make such a turnaround? Well, after Bernie's third win, that's when the consolidation of the economic and political elite started happening right then and there, because they were shaking in their boots. What can we do? How can we stem this off? And the media immediately went in that direction. You couldn't find a solid 3-minute segment, for the most part, that pointed out Bernie's attributes as far as I could see on the popular TV. And that started after the third election success by Bernie Sanders. And people are scratching their heads, and the pundits who perpetuated this in the press are saying, how did this happen? When Biden didn't have a ground game in Texas. Well, how did that happen? How did that happen? And for 2 or 3 solid weeks, that's how it happened. The popular press was carrying his campaign forward. That's my opinion. And what that only means is that I think, and my reaction to that is, I became very upset. To me, it confirmed my belief in Bernie's actions, programs, his campaign, his organizing style, because the elite are shaking in their boots. They're concerned. So that's the kind of context that I put things in. This is such an important election. I want Bernie to win. But if he doesn't, and he isn't the nominee, this movement is going to be continuing. And that's what people for Bernie, and I want to speak to them directly, do not lose faith, because this movement is growing and it'll move into the future. Look at the youth vote. Now, the criticism is that he isn't growing the youth vote, but he's getting 65% of the youth vote and the Latinx vote. And to me, that is very, very significant for this election and elections moving in the future and all the down ticket elections that are taking place. And the absolute battle that's going on within the Democratic Party with the insurgent, progressive insurgents and the party elite.
Don, what's your take on this in battle? I think Bill used the term battle. I think there's a battle for the soul of the Democratic Party.
Absolutely.
And so what's your take?
Well, I think the issue is, do they want to be the party of the working people and the poor, or do they want to be the party of the upper class and the intellectuals? And that's the struggle that's there. And I think Bill's analysis is right on target. We owe a great debt to Bernie. He has really educated this country so that now Medicare for all, the idea that everybody in this country should have health care, everybody's accepting that. Everybody's accepting that. But
everybody except the healthcare industry.
Right, of course.
The pharmaceutical corporation.
Right.
They're not quite on
No,
on
they're
board
not
with
quite
that
there
yet.
yet. No. I do think we have to really think about strategy. We want to win this campaign. I mean, I think the educating is so important, but we've got to win this campaign. And I think it's going to be really hard because of the unity of the mainstream Democratic Party and the media. I mean, I was just looking at the New York Times today on the editorial page, 3 articles against Bernie. 3 articles against Bernie. And that's the common thing now. So I guess what has to happen is what is happening here. People have to turn out. People have to realize this is going to be a fight. It's not just who has the best ideas. It's how many people do we get on the streets.
That's right.
How many people are knocking the doors. I've been knocking the last couple of weekends, and I've gotten a great response. People are very much supportive. We went into a very lower middle, no, not even middle class, a lower income neighborhood. And usually when you knock on doors in lower income neighborhood, oftentimes the response is, yeah, I don't think much about it, I'm not very involved. But the response we got was, already voted for him. Yeah, everybody in this house is for Bernie. We went to 45 different houses and only 3 didn't give us a warm response.
Yeah.
So it's encouraging to see, but it's an uphill battle because of the power that these other guys have.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, every political scientist will tell you that turnout. It is about the electorate. That's how elections are won. And it is probably most disappointing to me to see the youth vote, absolutely when they vote, is going to Bernie. Only 1 in 8 of youth vote, that's 18 to 29, actually have voted thus far in all of these primaries, right? So they're not turning out, right? So, and that's part of one of my hats at Western Michigan University, because when they turn out, they can win those elections and they can absolutely determine the outcome, right? In general, we see turnout for the youth at about 30%, right? So it's super low, right? Whatever we're doing with that message of the youth vote not coming out for these primaries that's a huge problem for Bernie, right? Because you're right, his argument is, I'm going to expand the electorate.
Yeah.
When they vote for him, but it's not happening yet. We're not seeing that kind of turnout. So if I'm a Bernie supporter, I'm out looking for that vote, right? In places like Michigan and in the states that you mentioned. The other thing that I want to talk about just a minute is I looked up, maybe no one on the panel also looked up the Republican numbers?
No.
Okay.
Don't usually get into their website.
So this is going to be a big downer, but this makes me incredibly worried. So I looked up several of the states, many states, there are 2 Republican contenders against Trump in the primary. Several states say, I'm not even going to hold a primary, but some states have held primaries. Alabama, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, most importantly Texas, all had higher Republican turnouts than they did for Democratic turnouts. One would predict the opposite. In a hotly contested Democratic primary that is all over the news, Democratic turnout should be at an all-time high for this primary to vote. This is the time to vote your heart, right? To get involved, to love a candidate and vote that way. Republican turnout was higher. And I'll give you the example from Texas. The last time we had this situation was G.W. Bush as an incumbent, second time around, running unopposed. He turned out just over about 2 million voters and got 94% of the vote. Trump turned out almost 3 million voters in Texas and got 97.5% of the vote. There's a consolidated, strong, there aren't many anti-Trumpers out there that are moving. And they are already coming out to vote. And when I looked up those numbers this morning, I was astounded. We gotta, if you want to beat Trump, if that is the ultimate goal here, we have to get started on turnout. It's abysmal for this primary. Sorry.
Oh, no, this is
real.
information.
This is when you talk about strategy, and when I thought, well, let me just check. I wonder where the numbers are at. I was astounded to see more Republicans turning out in an uncontested rate to show some sort of loyalty, to make sure they're all on the roster. I think there are some other reasons in a Trump, but versus looking at some old Bush numbers, but that's very scary to me.
Okay, well, let's
work on it.
Let's add some information to that
Yeah.
as far as we collectively understand. There's survey in regards to healthcare and Medicare for all.
Yeah.
Depending on the nature and wording of the survey, have the vast majority of people supporting
Exactly.
Medicare for all, a single payer national health plan. Okay, so, and it's contingent upon language. So, it offers us an organizing challenge on how we communicate with people, and Bernie's campaign is that you talk to people that you don't know.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's the grassroots nature of the campaign, and that's what we have to carry forward. Now, our Southwest Michigan Democratic Socialists of America chapter here in Kalamazoo has been doing that for 3 years, and we've garnered 1,500 signatures in support of Medicare for All. Our plan is, and we've launched a plan to have a resolution of support submitted to the city and county commissioners with so many signatures that it will hopefully impress that there's grassroots community support for this. Now, under that structure, we have been very successful signing up people. With this new effort, we're beyond the necessary amount that we need to go directly to the commissioners. We're developing a packet of information, and I would encourage anybody that's watching this discussion here to join our organization, Southwest Michigan Democratic Socialists of America. We have a separate email address that will funnel you right into our Medicare for All campaign, which I'm one of the coordinators of in southwestern Michigan. I also belong to Michigan for Single Payer Healthcare, which has over 30 organizers throughout the state that are doing the very same thing. We're working in coalition with Physicians for a National Health Plan, National Nurses United, Healthcare Now, Labor for Single Payer campaign. We're not alone. And the thing about Medicare for All, to me, that's the prism by which we look at now in the future in our critique of our, not only our healthcare system, but of our economic system. Because money pays, money gets you forward, and if you don't have it, you're out of luck. Now, the basic concept about Medicare for All and the national legislation, Senate Bill 1129, House Bill 1384, recognizes that healthcare in the U.S. has a $450 billion profit in this country that goes into the coffers of the elite, the political elite and the economic elite. That money is funneled into campaigns for people running for office that do not represent our interests. In fact, it's the opposite. They represent the interests of the wealthy in perpetuating that system. Under those two pieces of legislation, that $400 billion does not go there. It goes into health care coverage for everybody in the United States. That's how we pay for that. Now, that's critical because any candidate that offers a public option allows private carrier and that huge profit to continue. And that's what we're pushing. That's what people have to understand. Now, our current for-profit healthcare system kills or allows to die 60,000 people every year. In any other context, that's war. That's a war on the American population. And we would organize ourselves in such a fashion to stop that from happening, and that's what we're doing right now. It's criminal, the system that allows that to happen, and that's what has to be overthrown. And that's what DSA is fighting for. Join us, and that's what Bernie understands. That's his critique of American capital and how it's destroying our lives. And that's how we're going to move forward. I just want to add one more thing. I'm 70 years old. My family got health care in 1955. I'm sorry, but I was a sick kid. And the way we got health care is major strikes by organized labor from 47, 49, 50, and 55. And nobody voted for health care. Nobody said, here, this is you because you're great and you're the future of our country. It was taken by economic strikes. And that's how we got health care in this country. And that's what Bernie understands and DSA understands as a movement. Nothing, not everything will be settled by electoral politics. It'll be settled by grassroots organizing and economic strikes. And we've got to remember that. That's what happened with civil rights,
Yep.
women's rights, all the fundamental change that happened in this country. That's what we're moving forward. That's Bernie's movement. That's DSA. That's what we're carrying forward.
I think it's so important what Bill was saying there, because the debates come down to not about the issues,
Right.
but are you electable? Can
Right.
you get elected? And that becomes the issue. But I really do think that when we look at it, if Biden were to get elected, we would not approach the serious change that we need in this country. And that's what's really at stake. Okay, at best we could hope for a little improvement in the status quo. What we need is dramatic changes. I mean, when we look at this community with 36% of our kids living below the poverty line, or more, about 50% of African American kids nationwide. How many people, 19 million people without health care now, and how many more, Bill, with inadequate health care? About another 40 million.
That's right.
Yeah, so the logic of
Yeah.
the system is this gets worse.
Yep.
And unless we step in and do something serious about changing the way, the trajectory of the system, then this is going to be, in 4 years, we're going to be in terrible shape. So that's what Bernie's offering, and that's not what Biden's offering at all.
No. No.
Well, and to me, this is the core of the battle that's going on within the Democratic Party, right? I mean, we talk about the corporate Democrats and the progressive wing of the party. We talk about the centrists, the moderates, you know.
Yeah.
And of course, that language just keeps popping up. Oh, Bernie's too radical, you know. We need a moderate. We need a centrist. If we go with Bernie, we're going to scare off all those independent voters, right? And the issue about health care has been so striking to me is that people say they're going to take away your employer-funded health care, right? They're going to take that away from you. And what do you mean, take it away? It's enormously expensive, and it puts insurance companies in charge of your health care.
Right.
Bernie's plan is everybody gets covered. It costs less, and you don't have to choose to go to some system that's a broken system that is not in your best interest.
Yeah.
But that language, that's the moderate, centrist, corporate, democratic language, it seems to me, that's being perpetuated.
Yeah.
And one of the big problems with this, and this is, Bill, what you're all sort of picking up on, all of the actual polling of the American public supports these. These are not radical ideas to health care for all, to address climate change. The public is with us on these ideas, right? They want to see these things. And, as a political scientist, it is about the electorate, though. So why are our elected officials not taking what the public says they actually want done, right? Because there's an elite system that is controlling a lot of those politics and those votes. I think it's absolutely right. You've heard me give my talks enough, right? It's elite theory versus can we actually build the collective grassroots movement that is needed to either elect the right people or otherwise change the rules of the system, right? So I think you're absolutely right about that. But that all these polls are saying, here's what the American public is, and then to say that those are radical ideas that would ruin the country is really just a ridiculous notion. And that would be the first thing I would love to see the pundits give up on, right? And to show that what the Americans actually think about these issues.
But again, it is the corporate media. You use the term popular media, but I would say let's call it the corporate media because I think that's a more accurate terminology here. The New York Times, the Washington Post, I mean, even MSNBC, which is supposedly the liberal network, they've been horrible. And it cost Chris Matthews his job. He was so blatantly anti-Bernie. Of course, he had some other issues
there was some
as
other,
well.
this little Me Too movement.
That part of it. But I mean, Matthews is out. But overall, the tone of coverage at MSNBC has been terrible. So what is it? At CNN, as you mentioned, 5-minute interviews that are nothing more than a Biden commercial, right? So there's this effort by the corporate media, the corporate donors that support the Democratic Party. They don't want Bernie because Bernie threatens their economic interests.
That's right.
Even on NPR, I was listening to NPR the other day, and one of the newscasters was talking about Medicare for all. And, in reference to Warren's Elizabeth Warren's initial support and confusion and so forth. But the newscaster said mandatory, Bernie Sanders mandatory Medicare for all, which brings the whole prejudice
Yes.
of
Right.
what the legislation actually says, which is totally contradictory than what the legislation expresses.
Yeah.
Because with Medicare for all legislation, it's totally enhanced coverage. It's birth to death, it's long-term care in a facility, it's long-term care at home. It covers any medically necessary procedure, treatment that is determined by your physician, by your health care provider. And there's no more in-network.
Right.
It's gone. You can go to any provider you want. And for organized labor, that means whoever you're seeing now and whatever protections you have now will continue with Medicare for all. Don't fall for the fear that you're losing something, because you're not. You're gaining much. And by the corporate press indicating that you're losing something is a ruse. It's a creation, it's divisive, and it's used to divide what is true. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because Medicare for All is a rich program of coverage for everybody in the United States.
Let's use the term universal health care, because
Yes.
that's
That's
really
the
what
thing.
it is.
Yes.
And so people gain enormously
Right.
from switching to
Sure.
a universal health
Yeah.
care system. The only losses come, what's lost is the corporate profits that
Exactly.
the healthcare industry and the pharmaceutical companies are reaping. And they played no positive role in this at all.
No.
They're parasites.
Absolutely.
That's really what they are. They're parasites that stand between people and medical care. They stand between people and medical care, and they suck out huge amounts of money and profit and provide no benefit whatsoever that couldn't be achieved in much better fashion by going to a universal health care system.
Absolutely.
And of course, those are huge economic interests, and they're very much threatened by Bernie, and that's why the corporate press and why the corporate donors in the party and the centrist politicians who are supported by those donors are trying to block Bernie. I
Yeah.
mean, that seems to be pretty clear.
Yeah, and please understand, it's not an issue that we need to build a movement, or we need to influence the people that are elected office. It's already happening. And it's happening right now, and it's happening all over the country. And it's happening because of Bernie Sanders' critique of American capital and what needs to be done to remedy that situation. If you look at his Union Workers' Democracy Program, or his corporate responsibility and democratization programs, every program that he has goes exactly after the issue of wealth and how it's utilized and who owns it. He's proposing the beginning of a transformation of control over wealth from the elites to working people.
That's right.
And there shouldn't be a union member in this country, in this locality, in this state that doesn't support Bernie Sanders, regardless of what their leadership are telling them.
I'm really glad you bring that point up. And as a union, I'm represented by a union, and thanks for sharing your story, right, about how so many Americans are covered by healthcare because of the fights that the unions put up to get that for those folks, right? We should want that for everybody. And to me, I would rather absolutely have my union than not having to worry about negotiating health care every round, but focusing on some other things, right? That wouldn't have to take up all that time. If I'd be happy to replace what I get through my union with a universal health care system. I think that you're absolutely right to be focusing on health care as the issue. When we do look back at 2018, that's, at least the Dems got that right. Let's have a unity message. Let's run on healthcare, because it is the issue that's affecting my life right now, that I can show you how your life would be better. And people need to hear that, and they will, I hope, turn out and vote on that particular issue.
Sure.
Okay, so we've got all this radical
All right,
progressive
we can
talk
workshop it.
going on here.
I know, and I gave you the Trump numbers. I'm sorry.
So here's one of the
Very
issues.
worried.
That's
Is
scary.
this campaign about stopping Trump, and beating Trump, or is it about also, in addition to that,
Yeah.
building a positive commitment to a progressive governing agenda, which is Bernie, right?
Yeah.
Is Trump so horrible, so evil from a progressive perspective that we have to do everything we can to stop Trump, to defeat him, and if it takes Biden to do that, well, so be it. We've got to go with the electable candidate, the safe candidate, the centrist candidate. Political science person? What's your take on that?
I don't know if the camera caught that. They call it holding your nose, right?
Oh boy.
It's so hard. So can't we do both? I mean, that's what you're arguing. That's what Bernie is arguing, is we could do both. And people are electable if you vote for them. So there is that argument. It does, the one bit of truth, I think, to the labeling of socialist that may hurt the overall, if we want to call it electability, institution-wise, is those Senate and House seats. And Bernie, does Bernie help the Senate or House seats, or does Biden help the Senate or House seats, is the question that I look at, right? And some of those districts, some of those folks, right, they're in very, very tough partisan districts, those 2018 Dems that are going to have to run again. And I think they are worried, some of those House seats, about Bernie and running on socialism in a place where they just narrowly beat the Trump Republicans 2 years ago. So I'm not going to make a prediction, but I would say that's probably at least a politically plausible worry for some of those folks, right?
I'd like to respond to that.
Please.
Okay. And it's the question is fundamental.
Yeah.
And the answer is fundamental because it will inform
Yeah.
how we conduct ourselves.
Yeah.
And if we are going to conduct ourselves to build a better future today, to subscribe to fundamental change and not structural change,
Yeah.
to not fall into the black hole of the minutia detail dictated by the elite system that we're in. And right or wrong, I believe our concern about down ticket and electability is one of those created issues that serves the interests of the establishment. And that if we're going to build a progressive future, we stick to progressive, radical, socialistic principles, concepts, programs, and move that forward. Every movement has its casualties as we move forward. But if we compromise in our principles, it perpetuates the system that we're already in. And that's why maybe young people aren't voting. They're all looking alike to me. We have to be distinguishable, radically distinguishable from the current structure. So my concern about down ticket, in electability, can you imagine a Bernie Sanders fronting off Donald Trump in talking about the elite and consumption of resources and socialism for the rich and Medicare for all, a universal health care coverage, and doing the black and white of what Trump represents doesn't represent Trump. He represents a system of oppression, of economic and political oppression, and that's how we need to move forward. If people get down-ticketed, I think Bernie would be an asset to the down-ticket people. And look at the Democratic Party and what they've done to vendors, which is a multi-million-dollar corporate thing in providing for elections. Any vendor that supports or works for a progressive, challenging, and incumbent Democrat will be isolated from the Democratic Party. They just allowed a person, I think it was in Texas, a very conservative Democrat that is anti-women's rights, very conservative, the most conservative, I'm sorry, I can't think of his name right now, just barely won his election from a progressive and was supported by the Democratic Party in Nancy Pelosi. I mean, that's unconscionable, and it's for that very reason we're not going to compromise. Our compromise is within our progressive program, not giving bits and pieces to a system that's oppressed us and doesn't represent working families' interests for forever and will not, unless it's a simple temporary accommodation. And that's what Biden represents.
What I'm concerned about with Biden as well, and again, if Biden gets the nomination, obviously,
Have to go.
we have to try to defeat Trump and
That's right.
and support Joe Biden.
Very
But
good.
what I'm worried about is Joe Biden debating Trump. I'm worried about that.
Yes.
I don't think he would do well. I think he'll stumble
don't
all
either.
over the stage.
No.
I think Trump will wipe the floor with him.
Yeah.
I'm also worried if Biden gets the nomination, where do all those young people go?
I know.
They stay home.
So they
I-
definitely stay home, right?
Well, they're not coming
They're
out
not
as
coming
much
out
right now, but they really will stay home.
like we hoped, and they probably won't
and,
come out.
And they're not going to campaign. They're going to, I mean, your job in
I
trying
know.
to mobilize We Vote for
Absolutely.
Biden as opposed to Bernie is tremendously different.
Immeasurably more difficult, yeah. And it's not that, I disagree, on what the choice is. I do think some of those folks running for those seats again will be taking this very, very seriously, right? And at some point, I am worried about the rest of our institutions, right? No matter, some of the last 4 years, I think we have to take in some perspective, how powerful do we really want our executive to be? And when and how do we want Congress and our state legislators and our local governments to take back their powers and their control that they have? And I think that's where I sort of look at that overall structural picture. There's a lot of opportunity there from local to state to Congress to do exactly the kind of things that you're talking about from an actual policy perspective, right? But yeah, it gets tougher and tougher to do the mobilization campaign with a Biden. And I agree, the debates worry me. I don't think we'd see the turnout. I mean, I'm worried that it's going to be Hillary 2.0 or, how far back in history do we?
I think
That
that's-
worries me greatly.
I think that's a better comparison.
Hillary?
Hillary Clinton
Yeah.
and Biden. I think that's,
Yeah.
this isn't a McGovern
Right.
issue. It's status quo
Yeah.
to something very, very different that people can recognize as hopeful.
Right.
I think that's what the issue is.
And we tried that in 2016 against a now unknown foe.
So Denise, in some of the
Yeah.
elections that we've seen, 2018 and just a
Yep.
couple of the gubernatorial elections last fall,
That's right.
we saw a lot of middle to upper middle class Republican voters deserting the Republican Party because of Trump and voting for the Democrats.
Yep.
If Biden is the nominee, do those people still do that? If Bernie's the nominee, do they not? What's
So
your
the
take
other-
on that?
yeah.
I mean, that's another constituency that
Yep.
that we have, kind of isolated in the past to talk about.
It's true. So the other big constituency, and the media will call this the suburban vote, for lack
Yeah,
of a
right,
better
right.
term, the white middle class suburban vote is particularly women. Right now, the numbers show in the states that have primary, the numbers are showing that vote is going to Biden. Right, and those folks are, and then maybe they were Trump voters at one point. Though some of those folks are going for Biden, especially when you looked at like Virginia, right, and Elizabeth Warren not winning Massachusetts, right? Those kinds of states, that's where that gap was. So that may be the only pathway for a Biden is to rely on that kind of suburban vote.
But probably that vote's not going to go to Bernie.
I think that would be tough. I know Bill doesn't care.
Now-
It's not that you don't care.
So here-
I know.
So here's another question. Maybe
Yeah.
Bill wants to respond to that, but here's another question that I have. What about some of the working class white vote that
Yeah.
went to Trump because they saw,
Yeah.
the
That's right.
Democratic Party had not represented them, their economic conditions had deteriorated. They thought maybe Trump will shake things up
Right.
and maybe bring the jobs back and
Right.
all of that. Are they going to? So Bernie offers them,
Yeah.
I think, an opportunity to say, here's a guy that's probably really going to represent my economic interests. This guy in the White House has
Yep.
not, despite what he said he was going to do. Is there some vote there that Bernie can grab onto to pull back
I
away
think-
from Trump?
I think there's already indications that that's
Yeah.
happening. And we can only hope that'll continue to trend that way with activity and face-to-face conversations and explaining. Don't forget, we've had almost 4 years of experience now, and there's companies still outsourcing, downsizing here in the United States, going over to foreign countries. There are strikes and labor disputes. We have almost 4 years of solid experience of exactly the opposite of what was pledged by Trump. And we have a guy in Bernie Sanders that has 100% support rate for organized labor and has a program to expand labor organizing in the United States. We can only hope that will trend towards Bernie Sanders in the remaining parts of the primaries that take place. But it's going to take activity. It just takes people going out there and doing and talking and what needs to be done.
That's right.
And making clear what the real issues are and where home is.
Yeah. It was a significant portion of voters who self-reported, right, exit polls, in Michigan in particular, who voted for Bernie, right, in the primaries, and Bernie won Michigan in 2016, that then switched to Trump, right, when faced with the choice of Hillary Clinton. So I think that is a significant chunk that Bernie can pick up.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Just to give a perspective, not a different perspective, but to emphasize what's already been said here, is I spent 3 weeks in Iowa before their caucuses. And I worked with a group, a very small group, called Iowa Labor for Bernie, which is an appendage of our revolution after the 2016. And we did we targeted organized labor. And we were able to get around 60 to 100 activists, very strong Bernie supporters, that want to continue, as Bernie indicates, organizing beyond the caucus in Iowa throughout the campaign, because Bernie says very clearly, if his campaign doesn't do anything else but lead to organizing for fundamental change, he'll consider his campaign a failure. So these 60 to 200 activists, we're going back to Iowa. They're interested in change and speaking to their unions and their membership. Some of them are office holders. There's elections coming up in organized labor in Iowa within the Democratic Party there. So we're going back, we're helping organize what we consider a more progressive leadership core there to build something in the future and continue building what's already happened. So that I see happening throughout the states. And that's the future. And that future is happening right now, pursuant to Bernie's campaign.
So what we're going to see is Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, they're going to be where we're going to see what the reaction is. Right. So it's going to be tough. But the movement is growing, and long term, that's what's really going to make the difference. If Biden did win, he's going to have to lean toward Bernie and make some adjustments that he wouldn't have never made. It's not what we want, but that would be that.
You know, the thing to remember too is over the past 2 years, 3 years, we've had statewide teacher strikes in 4 or 5 states, some in the South. That's a function of the system that we're under, the economic and political system that we're under. That points to the future of what can happen. And I think that future is going to happen whether Trump stays in office, help us all, or Biden stays in, or if Bernie wins. Because Bernie understands it's going to take a social movement with political and economic consequences to accomplish the programs he wants to implement. It's just not going to be electoral. It has to come from the people in the streets and exercising their power over the economic system.
Clearly, that's the story of the civil rights movement.
Yep.
It wasn't that politicians finally saw that there was injustice here and we got to change. It was only people being on the streets
That's right.
and making change that forced it to happen.
That's
right.
that's right. That's what Bernie says. He says, everybody says this is impossible to happen until it happens.
Right, right.
And that came from South Africa.
Mandela.
In Mandela.
Mandela,
And
right.
he's absolutely right. And that difference informs, it really shows the movement of the people to accomplish things that the elite and the pundits say it's impossible to do.
Right.
It is not.
And South Africa was a good example. When Mandela went to jail, they thought it was over. But in the end, he became president. And it took international solidarity, but it was mostly the people within the country that really changed things.
Right.
Two other issues that greatly concern me with a Biden presidency are the military budget and climate change. And so, it seems to me that the most recent Pentagon budget was a complete abdication by the Democratic Party to go ahead and vote for. I mean, here we are, we're ponying up north of $700 billion for the Pentagon. And of course, when we add in all the other spending, it ends up being well over $1 trillion. I mean, we're trending toward having $1 trillion Pentagon budget just in and of itself, not even counting all the nuclear weapons money and everything else. So we can't do anything that Bernie wants to do if we keep spending $1 trillion on the military. I mean, it becomes exceedingly difficult to do that. We have to have a fundamental reallocation of that money. I mean, already, if we look at the discretionary budget, the budget that Congress can actually allocate, it's 55 to 60% is going to the military already. That has to change. Climate change is another issue. Now, the Obama administration made some progress on climate change, but not nearly what we needed to do, not as much as physics demands.
That's right.
But nonetheless, we need to do much more. We need to do it much faster, and I just don't see that happening. Bernie seems to be the only candidate out there who gets it on climate change, who supports the Green New Deal, and who was willing to.
Sunrise, the youth movement, that's where a lot of power could come from for Bernie, has endorsed well in advance. When there was still a field of 12 or 15 candidates, they went ahead and endorsed Bernie Sanders based on his climate plans, right? And any environmental scorecard you look at, Bernie gets an A and Biden gets about a D. So I'm just going to put the information out there for voters, because I have to stay nonpartisan most of the time for my We Vote role. But I think your point about there is a role for government, right? And then there's a role for civil society. And both of those have to be really strong. And Ron, we often talk on this show, bowling alone, right? That the collapse in organizational abilities and the actual sociological connection and imagination of Americans working together, that's collapsed over the last 30 years, right? We've historically had a very robust civic organization, right? We were famous for it as those American joiners at the beginning of our country, and we're seeing that be revisited and has to.
And Denise, I'm gonna have you segue right into, because we're under 5 minutes
under
here
5,
now,
so,
and so I know we speaking of organizing and pulling things together, we've got a lot of things going on with regard to the climate issue here in Kalamazoo. So
I'm in awe of all the Medicare organizing, the universal health care that's going on. Come join the Kalamazoo Climate Crisis Coalition if you care about putting those issues together, because they are related and they are tackling the same wealth inequality and elite issues that you're speaking about, Bill. I think they're all very related to our politics of the time. We've got a few more Fridays for Future left here. This Saturday we'll be out at the Kalamazoo Nature Center for regenerative agriculture, a way to rethink our food system. Talk about big agribusiness versus local farmers, right? All these issues have the same dichotomy. And we've got some other panels coming up, and we will close that session April 10th with our very own Ron Kramer, whose book has come out, Carbon Criminals, Climate Crimes. So we're very excited to do that. We're also planning a whole Earth week. So 1 Earth Day, 2 Earth Days was not enough, Don. An entire week from April 18th, which will be the kickoff day that is organized event at the Kalamazoo Farmers Market this year to April 25th, which will close out at Kalamazoo Nature Center, and a huge tree planting here in our community. I think we've almost got every day in between filled. Of note, Don will be getting an invite to this. On April 22nd, we'll be holding a local panel for city and county of Kalamazoo officials to discuss where are they at with their climate action planning and make that happen. So there's lots of events going on around that and organizing and trying to make sure those folks understand what's happening and are out there. And I will plug, right, so I hope you're watching this and you know what you're doing March 10th. Now that the choice is down to 2, I didn't even get to say how sad I was about Elizabeth Warren, but that's a whole other show.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about that another time.
I know. I think it's pretty clear what I'm going to need to do. But I just wanted to do a plug. Western Michigan University We Vote, our voter registration, education, and turnout drive has been, it's tough, 1 in 8. We're seeing really low numbers and our youth being interested in this primary. We will be out there all day. We will be doing shuttles. You can now in Michigan, of course, register and vote up until Election Day. If you are not registered to vote, it is okay. You can go to your clerk where you live, show proof of residency, get registered, fill out your ballot right then, all the way up till March 10th at 8 p.m. Please just go vote and get yourself in the system. I think that would be my main point to let everybody know. And if you voted already for the primary, you didn't absentee vote, you can do a spoiler ballot. So let's say you voted for somebody that is already dropped out now.
Yep.
You can go back to your clerk and you can switch your support to one of the remaining 2 and make sure that your vote is counted and not quote unquote spoiled. You got to go visit your clerk's vote. Michigan.gov/vote give you every information on where your clerk is, how to do all these things. You got to go in person and got to prove your ID and get in there. But please go do it. Most important thing.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Take a deep breath.
Had to get it all in there.
Bill, want to thank you so much for being here. Tremendous insight. Thank you for all the great work that you're doing. Don, Denise, regular commentators, great work. Thank you for joining us on Critical Issues. Please come back and see us again. Critical Issues, Alternative Views.